Hello fanatics, I'm back. Welcome to True Crime Sundays. Today I'm covering a case right here from the UK, Tunbridge Wells in Kent to be exact. We're going to delve into the dark secrets of David Fuller. This is a chilling true crime case that shocked the nation. I hadn't heard of it, but I'm surprised I didn't. Please join me as we uncover the harrowing details of this gripping story and explore the very dark depths of human nature. Please stay tuned for a detailed account of the events that unfolded piece by piece, revealing the sinister truth behind David Fuller's facade. My new backdrop for my true crime, it's me reading a true crime. I just have to find David Fuller. Here he is. Please, I just want to put a disclaimer that today's episode talks about murder, rape, assault, abuse of corpses, aka necrophilia, which includes children. If this episode is not for you, please feel free to just click out. Do what's best for you and look after your own well-being, okay? Hopefully I will see you in a future episode, they're all depraved individuals that we talk about here in true crime, but this one is harrowing, okay? If you are still here, grab your projects, grab your drinks and settle in, fanatics, because this is a gruesome one, and I'll be honest, it hit the very pits of my own stomach. So you've had fair warning, okay my friends, you've had fair warning. Obviously all true crime cases are depraved, but this one gets worse and worse. So, who is David Fuller? David was born on September the 4th in 1954, and he grew up in Portsmouth. That is the south coast of England. As an adult, he worked as an electrician. And he worked hard to gain these qualifications, but he worked at multiple different hospitals in and around Kent and Sussex. He was married 3 times and he had 4 children from his different marriages. David was known as a hard worker. He was friendly. He was a popular staff member at the hospital where he worked, and Fuller seemed to be an ordinary man living a quiet life, and he enjoyed innocent hobbies such as cycling and bird watching and photography. Photography was one of his hobbies. But there were early hints that something darker was brewing beneath the surface. And let's face it, he's made it into my true crime playlist. So there's much more to him than meets the eye. In 1973 and 1977, David was convicted of a series of home burglaries, referred to as creeper burglaries, in which he broke into houses through rear windows, but he never served actual jail time. And isn't this always the way? Isn't this always the way? In 1987, 25-year-old Wendy Nell, she was living alone in Tunbridge Wells in Kent, and she had recently moved there after going through a failed marriage. Wendy was independent, she was hard working, and she was hoping to have children someday. You know, she was coming out of a bad relationship and finding her feet, and she was getting her life back on track. She was socialising more with her friends, you know, going to the pub, just getting out there and finding her feet once again. And she had recently met a new guy in her life, quite recently. Wendy's job, she was a manager, and this generally meant that she was kind of the last to leave and look up the store where she worked, and sometimes that went into the early hours of the morning, and her new man would walk up to the store to meet her and walk her to her home, so that she wasn't walking alone in the dark, down the dark streets, and she just was with someone, and he would walk her home. And once she was safely inside of her house, he would walk back home on his own. Quite romantic, quite sweet, and yeah, how lovely is that? Now, she first crossed paths with David Fuller while she was a manager of a Super Snaps photo store. These are the old, you know, where you took your cameras to be processed and turned into photos. Fuller was an avid photographer, so he often took his photos in to be developed. And this is how we think they first interacted. June 23rd in 1987, Wendy didn't turn up for work, and that was very unusual. So all her co-workers and her boss, they're all calling her, and all the calls went unanswered, and worry was starting to settle in. Colleagues, friends, no one could get hold of her. So someone, a colleague or a friend, called her new boyfriend, and he said, well, she made it home because I walked her home. And then he was personally starting to worry, so he tried calling, to no avail. He lived quite nearby, obviously he'd been walking her home from work and everything, so he hurried round and he was banging on the door, calling out her name, thinking that she may have slept in or was still asleep or something. So, you know, he's banging, trying to get in. She did live on a ground floor bedsit. So she was living on the ground floor, and he was looking through all the windows on the ground floor trying to see if she was even home or gone out, when he came across an open window, and he actually managed to gain entry through this window, and you know, he's got in. He found her deceased in her bed, naked and covered in blood, and he immediately called the police. Detectives determined that she had been sexually assaulted, possibly after she was deceased. Just a few months later, Kent was robbed by another terrifying murder. Caroline Pierce, 20 years old, also lived alone in Tunbridge Wells. She worked at Buster Brown's. That's a local restaurant in Tunbridge Wells. On November the 24th in 1987, neighbours reported, this was after the police had come, that they started reporting hearing screams just outside the front door. They were unsure if it was outside in the street, someone having an argument, or if it was actually inside the apartment building. But it was actually at the front door of Caroline's apartment. She was found deceased in a ditch 3 weeks later, nearly 40 miles from her home, wearing only a pair of tights. Now, I had read that the tights were put back on her afterwards because she was sexually assaulted. Her injuries were similar to Wendy's, leading police to suspect a double homicide by the same perpetrator. Because both women had lived in bedsits or studio apartments. A bedsit is like where you have your bedroom, which is your private quarters, but you share a front room and the kitchen, communal areas. They both lived alone, and they both lived in similar things. The crimes were soon dubbed the bedsit murders. For years, the perpetrator got away with it because DNA. He did leave a fingerprint at Wendy's house, I do believe, because he climbed through the window that the boyfriend did. They couldn't do anything with it. It's the 80s. But DNA was left behind, and this would be his downfall in years to come. In 2007, detectives reached a breakthrough in the bedsit murder case. Thanks to improvements in DNA technology, there was also a cold case team that was looking back at all this evidence, and they saved all of the DNA. So they were like, whoa, let's get this in. Let's see if we can find him in the database. But after reviewing the DNA, found at both crime scenes, they were able to create a DNA profile for the perpetrator, making it easier to narrow down the suspect pool. Quote, one day, someone's going to ring that door and say, we've caught him, end quote. The police were just biding their time. Wendy Nell's father, quote, "And there will be a celebration. By God, there will be, especially if he goes down for a very, very long time," end quote. Poor families. Decades this went on. In the years that followed, further developments in technology made it easier for detectives to not only extract DNA but to match it using the family DNA. I can't say that word, familial DNA, which allows investigators to determine whether someone else in their database is related to an individual whose DNA was extracted from a crime scene. In 2020, 30 years later, plus some, in 2020, detectives found someone whose DNA was a close partial match to the bedsit murderers. And they lived near where the crimes took place. Now, he couldn't have done it. He was too young. No, he couldn't have done it because it wasn't 100% match. But the person who did match was one of David Fuller's siblings. So police had closed in on David Fuller at last. They were looking for around about a 60-year-old man, and they put the work in. And on December the 3rd, 2020, police arrived at a quiet cul-de-sac in Heathfield, East Sussex, where David Fuller was living with his third wife and a teenage son. They banged on the door. They were both in bed because they turned up at the early hours. They were both in bed and they arrested him. And he just went quietly. He didn't even tell them, he just went quietly. And he was arrested for the murder of Wendy Nell and Caroline Pierce. More than 30 years after Wendy Nell and Caroline Pierce were murdered, it seemed their killer would finally see justice. Yay. Okay, they have the DNA. So they've got their man. And yay, the end. But no, that was not all that police found in David Fuller's home. Now, after his arrest, detectives sought a warrant to search his home, and they're now looking for concrete evidence to tie him to Wendy and Caroline, because yes, they have the DNA, but you know yourself, in a court case they want it more or less slam dunk, and the more evidence you have compiled, the harder it is to kind of argue in a court of law. They need to seal the case for a pending court case. Kind of a given, right? So they've gone to his home in order to kind of find something that ties him to Wendy and Caroline. But what they found was horrific. Okay, absolutely horrific. Detectives came across, quote, a library of unimaginable sexual depravity in the form of a horde of printed photographs and thousands of USBs, you know, memory sticks that you save all your data on, those, along with floppy disks, all full of photos and videos depicting sexual abuse, including child pornography. Police found a whopping 4 million disturbing images of this kind. 4 million images. Most had come from the internet. Most, but not all. An examination of his computer, his hard drive at his home in Heathfield, East Sussex, revealed 818,051 images and 504 videos of his abuse, as well as evidence of his persistent interest in rape, abuse and murder of women. That's a lot. But then detectives came across a collection of horrifying images. Fuller had taken himself. One detective was talking to another detective. Quote, "Are these ones he's taken?" one officer asked at the time. Quote, "Why do they look dead?" another officer asked. The images showed David Fuller sexually abusing the corpses of dozens of women and girls at the hospitals that David Fuller had worked at from 1989 until his 2020 arrest. Police soon found that as an electrician, David Fuller had Keycard access to the hospital's morgues, where he could let himself in after the other hospital staff had gone home. Now, I don't know if you know this, but in hospitals, the morgue part of it generally works, say, 9 till 5. Them kind of hours. He would work all random hours because he was the maintenance man and, you know, he was needed on hand all over the place. So he was using his access all areas swipe card to enter the morgue and abuse the bodies of females who had died in accidents or on the wards or on the operating table. He also knew where it just gets worse. I've kind of already researched this and it just gets worse. He already knew where the security cameras were, so he could perform these acts out of the line of sight. But he was dumb enough to faithfully, I mean, thank God he did, record them on his own camera. Okay, and he was hiding these all around the house so that he was sticking them under tables and sticking them on the top of drawers so that his wife and son wouldn't find them. The police also found a black book in which they said he wrote down his victims' names. Now, they can't just take his word for all of this. They have to find the evidence to back these claims up. Some victims, it appeared, he visited repeatedly until they were basically wheeled out of the morgue and sent home to their loved ones. Soon, all this shocking evidence, paired with the evidence that he had committed the bedsit murders, painted a picture of a man obsessed with abuse, rape, murder, and of course necrophilia. Fuller turned around and he said, quote, "I'm not insane," he told officers during an interview. I may have some sort of residual personality problems, which, as you know, I've gone a completely almost Christian life and a deadliest life altogether at the same time, with no crossovers. It's just two different personalities, end quote. I don't know what part of his whole being was Christian in any of that. Initially, David Fuller denied that he was responsible for the bedsit murders. He then claimed diminished responsibility to those due to an unstable mental state. Yeah, that's not going to fly, dude. That's not going to fly. On the fourth day of his trial, however, he switched his plea to guilty as the evidence against him stacked up. And this is what I was saying earlier, you can't just go into court with a DNA match and say they did that because this is the DNA. You need a whole case. In December 2021, David Fuller was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole for the murders of Wendy and Caroline. Hallelujah. I mean, that's quite a hefty prison sentence here in the UK. I know America are very harsh with theirs, but you know, he was given an additional 12 years for the crimes he committed in the mortuary. After the conviction, investigators managed to identify at least 101 mortuary victims, ranging in age from children below 18, I believe the youngest was 9. Well, one was 9, I don't know if that was the youngest, up to women up to 100 years old. So far, Kent detectives have formally, and again you need that concrete evidence, formally identified 81 of his victims in the mortuary. You know, with his little black book, his videos, they have formally identified 81. Now, I would just like to take a minute here because I have to give credit to those police officers that had to sit there and watch that disturbing footage and having to identify the bodies from the mortuary, because I did read somewhere that they identified some in the actual footage just from the hospital bracelets. Can you even imagine? Just when you're admitted into hospital, you get your plastic bracelet with your name and stuff on and your date of birth and all of that. They identified some bodies by that alone. What a truly thankless task of a job that must be, and the therapy that must be needed to overcome not being able to unsee what those officers see. And my heart truly goes out to them. Oh, and I personally want to thank you for your service, and in this case, I mean not only your service but your dedication to your job, and in this case alone securing a conviction from sitting there and doing that. Yeah, oh my gosh, thank you for, oh my god, I can't even imagine that job. During his sentencing hearing, the mother of one of these victims, a 9-year-old girl, she addressed him in court directly. Quote, "You raped my baby." She couldn't say no to the dirty 66-year-old man who was abusing her body. "I feel guilty. I left her there. I will not enjoy my life again. This unnatural, sick pain I will never get over." End quote. The judge in this case had similar harsh words for David Fuller.
"And who are you, David Fuller? You are 68 years old. In 1973 and 1976, you were convicted of dozens of burglaries committed by climbing into homes through windows. You spent the subsequent years living a lie, the facade of a mild and ordinary life. While in seclusion, you committed revolting and outrageous acts of the deepest darkness. You have a family who you deceived over all those years. As I told you last year, the depravity of what you did to those you killed and those you defiled after death reveals that your conscience is seared. It's almost impossible to believe that a single man can cause the misery to so many that you have done. But you did it, and in consequence you are paying the price that human justice can exact, the rest of your mortal life in prison.
Quote, "You became a vulture, picking your victims from among the dead. Within the hidden world of hospital mortuaries, which you were free to inhabit simply because you had a swipe card. The depravity of what you did reveals your conscience is seared." And there you go. What a truly harrowing case. I did come across articles and different things where the ex-wife, I'm assuming she'd left him, but I mean, he had 4 children. I didn't go into that too much, but they basically disowned him. They didn't know who he was, you know, as a dad. It's so depraved, and I can't even wrap my head around that. I mean, he committed 2 murders. They suspect that there are thousands of bodies that he's abused from the mortuary, and I'm guessing the reason that he stopped murdering people is because he found a way, because it was the act of murder was then to sleep with them after death. That's why he murdered his victims. Having gained a job in a hospital where you have access 24/7 to a mortuary, I mean, like I said, he was working as a maintenance man, an electrician, and he worked several different hours shifts, and he could gain access at any time. Now, there was kind of, I think, after the fact more than anything, I mean, he must have been going to the mortuary several times during his shift, right? And like you say, there's no CCTV within the mortuary. I don't know if that's changed now, because I do believe laws have changed because of this case. I will look that up and add this on. But no CCTV within the mortuary. Obviously they are performing autopsies, and out of respect, you wouldn't necessarily think you would need CCTV within a mortuary. So it's pretty depraved. And he got away with his 2 murders for 30 years. He's still in prison. He is, I'm not sure where, but he is in prison. He's going to die in prison, and yay. I mean, he had his whole life. He lived his whole life and went away as an old man. That's the only injustice that I feel in this case. But in the 80s, DNA was not a thing. But again, hats off to the police officers in the 1980s that did save that DNA, because it's of no use to them right now, but they knew at some point they could link it all together and find their man. They always knew that they would find their man. And then the cold case team came in. The case was never dropped. It was always worked on. They just couldn't do anything with it. Hence it went cold. And then the cold case people came in. And thankfully DNA is what it is today. Because he wouldn't have lasted 5 minutes. You know, they had the son. I think it was a random thing. I don't think that his brother committed any crimes. I think it was more of a random kind of thing where they got the DNA and then managed to link it back to David. Technology has come so far. Like, you can't get away with very much. And of course CCTV now is everywhere. So that is the very, very sad case. Wendy Nell and Caroline Pierce are remembered in this true crime. They are victims, and my heart goes out to Wendy and Caroline's families. as always in my true crime, you know, we got him. Well, I say we. They got him. The police got him, and it's not going to bring you any closure. But they got their man. They got their man, and thank goodness they got a search warrant. It's just so sad. So sad that so many thousands, I'm telling you, it will be in the thousands, that guy was in the mortuary doing that to people. I'd be mortified. To the 9-year-old, the mother who said that she feels guilty, I can't imagine the pain that this individual put on you personally, but you have nothing to feel guilty about. We all assume that our loved ones are in the mortuary and they're safe and waiting to be released to the families so they can have a funeral and everything else. I'm so sorry that ever happened to you, and my heart truly goes out to you. A lot of praise and thanks to the police, and especially those that sat through all of that footage. I don't know how you did it. I know, personally speaking, I think they do very short terms in that environment, because can you imagine that being your entire job for years on end? No, I cannot. Okay, so I quickly went and had a look at an article, and the laws that changed because of David Fuller. They are bringing in an increased sentence. You got 2 years before. They're now adding 5 onto that. So it's a 7-year minimum sentence. Yay. You know, it's grim. One of the people talking said we in 2024 we shouldn't have to do this, but in the wake of David Fuller we need harsher. We need to update that. 2 years is no good, so they're bumping it up to 7, and you also get 5 years now, just for touching, inappropriately of course, for touching a corpse. So that's all good, that's all positive. It's just very tragic. It's so very tragic. One of the MPs, I think it was Clark, turned around and said, you know, the victims, that they lost a loved one, tragic, you know, just tragic. Mr. Clark, he turned around and he said that the loved ones, they suffered a loss in their family, they grieved, and then they held a funeral service and said goodbye to their loved ones, and obviously they will always have a hole in their heart. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but they will always have a hole in their heart because, you know, their loved one is gone. Whether that's, he did list them all, a sister, a niece, an aunt, a mum, a grandma, a wife, you know, so many variables there. They have a funeral service, they say goodbye, they try to get on with the rest of their lives, and then one day a police officer knocks on the door and informs them that while they were in the mortuary they were defiled by David Fuller. I mean, can you even comprehend that? I cannot. It is so heartbreaking, and this one man has done so much damage. he's in jail. You know, we can have that one at least. And yeah, so they are upping it from 2 years to 7 years, and if you touch a corpse inappropriately, that's an automatic 5 years. Because there was no gap. It was either you're abusing a corpse, but I guess touching is abusing, but it's not the same extreme. So 5 years and 7 years, regardless. And yay, you know, it's not something you would have thought they would have to pass in the Commons, in the House of Commons, but it did need updating. And thanks to David Fuller and the seriousness of his crimes, this is where the new legislation's coming in. You know, will it be a deterrent? I don't know. I don't know how widespread necrophilia is as a whole, but you know, there you go. There you go. I just thought I would add this in very quickly, as I said I was going to look it up. David Fuller, also I looked up. He is in His Majesty's Prison Service. It's Frankland, which is in Durham. I also googled where is it, but yeah, he's in Durham. Apparently there's other prisoners such as Wayne Cousins, not sure what he did, and Michael Stone. Also we can look into them as well. But yeah, there you go. There you go. I just thought I'd add this in here very quickly. Thank you for joining me for today's case. As always, please do leave your thoughts and comments. Please do be respectful to the families. You guys always are, I know that. But yeah, thank you for joining me for today's case. I warned you, it was a heavy one. I do have another one lined up next week. I'm going to release these on Sundays. Hopefully do it this way a little bit more often, though I do feel a little awkward, you know. I'm not doing anything. I totally understand why Betty does makeup or I diamond paint, but I prefer this interaction, I think. So this is going to be the preferred way that I go for now. It might change, might go back to diamond painting, but yeah, thank you for joining me, and I will see you next time, where we talk about another depraved individual. Yeah, why do we do this to ourselves? I don't know. Okay, I'm out of here. Thank you. Stay safe out there, guys. Stay safe, and if you live on the ground floor, lock all your doors. Even if you don't, I mean, you know, perpetrators can get in. Have a wonderful rest of your week, and I will see you next week. Toodaloo!